Hi, my name is Janet Maulbeck. I'm the Executive Director of Interweave. We're a small nonprofit here in New Jersey working to support spirituality for daily living, an integrated spirituality that nurtures wellness, the common good, and your spiritual life. Each year, we have a telethon. It's a way of keeping that work going. If you didn't have a chance to tune in, we hope you'll take advantage of this second opportunity. We want to thank you for supporting our work with 12 wonderful conversations about nurturing hope through prayer and practice, art and action. Thank you in advance for being there for Interweave and for the spiritual life in raising up the importance of hope. What we say here at Interweave is, let hope live in you. Thank you. Happy holiday. Welcome to the 6th hour of the 4th annual virtual Interweave telethon. And I'm the host, the panelists. This is what happens. It's I don't know if people remember the Jerry Lewis Labor Day Marathon, which sort of inspired this. We're nowhere near this. No, we are not doing a 24-hour marathon. We're doing a mere 12 hours. So my fond memories of Jerry Lewis and that good work that he did, boy, I'm inspired by that guy. I am also inspired by our next guest, who is Ben Francisco Maulbeck. Yes, you may notice a last name similarity. Our topic is nurturing hope through the art of advocacy, giving, and futuring. That's a part of our conversation actually that I'm most excited about. Um, so Ben, we're excited that you're here today. You would think, since we do have a similar surname, that it would be easy for me to introduce you to other people, but no, it's not, because you have such an impressive resume that even somebody who has been witnessing to your life journey for your entire life has needs to look at her paper to talk about you. Ben Francisco Maulbeck is a senior fellow, writer, and philanthropic consultant. He's a senior fellow at the Philanthropic Initiative for Racial Equity, and he previously served as the president of funders for LGBTQ issues and as also vice president for Hispanics in philanthropy. He's also author, storyteller, and yes, a futurist. Welcome, Ben. So nice to talk to you in the middle of the day. Um, and I'm not going to be like Nicole Wallace and Michael Schmidt, pretending that we're not related. We are related.
I was gonna say, should I say mom or Reverend Janet?
I think you could. It is a challenging thing for you. I think in the spirit of authenticity, say whatever feels
Okay.
comfortable. Um, because actually you don't call me Janet.
I do
Although
not.
some familiar members do. So Ben, we do when I hear, wow, that long list of your resume, I've introduced a lot of people as friend and colleague. So yes, Ben is my son, but you can hear how but he's also friend and colleague. And we also there are a lot of themes, themas, a lot of the threads of our life that are connected not just through biology, but through spirit gift mission. So, and thank you, Ben, for so generously coming today to share your thoughts and have a conversation with us about how to nurture hope in an incredibly complicated world that we're living in. And and actually, shock of all shockers, Ben, these have actually been, you sometimes you name something with a hope, quote unquote, and intention. And as a writer, as somebody who's done some marketing and has called for things, you don't always know that they're going to come. Well, I feel like as we've had these conversations, hope is actually coming. Um, and we have been talking about, I don't know if you had a chance to listen, about things that you would expect an axial age, the amount of contention, how much is facing us. But people's responses to that are nurturing my hope. And I just wondering, uh, not really sure which one of our many conversations we should start out with. But okay, let's start out in order of how it's presented. How are you as an advocate? Because many of the things that we've talked about this morning already, we talked about climate change was a very powerful conversation. How are you as an advocate in this axial age, in this time of tremendous realities that need to be faced? How are you hearing the question about how can we nurture hope?
Okay, well, thanks for having me on the show, Mom. I'm glad to be here and really love the Interweave community, and I'm also very impressed with the high tech levels this year. Thank you, Chris. Um, I mean, one of the things I'll say I am thinking about in terms of hope is feeling connected to ancestors and to history. I think is a major source of hope for me right now. Um, and sort of, I think, because it is very, I think I feel like we're leaning into hope partly because it is very easy to feel hopeless at this moment in the past couple months, the past several years, right? And so it helps me to remind myself they're actually, social change and the struggle for human rights and for the moral arc bending toward justice, like that's actually never been easy. Um, so I think of like how hard it must have been to be fighting against Jim Crow, to be for friends I know who lived through the worst of the AIDS epidemic, who their friends were dying and they were um, having to take care of them while also advocating and marching on, Washington, D.C. and all these things. Um, that's all been really change has never come easily, and it's often been the case that we have not had power. Um, and I also think it is sort of at the intersection of advocacy and the other topic of giving, and also what you were saying in the beginning. Um, I think, a lot of how I came into this work, like a lot of my, when hearing my own resume read, like a lot of my work is working with either foundations, which have large endowments, or individuals who have significant wealth and helping them give in a way that has impact. Um, and I think that strikes me often in my work, and that actually I've talked about in meetings and at conferences and in speeches, but I don't know if I've had the chance to say to you, is a lot of what I learned about philanthropy, I really learned from my family and in places like the Shrine of St. Joseph and communities like Interweave and places they're connected to. Um, and I think some of those practices that I learned, that one, those practices give me hope, and they're things that I have tried to integrate into my work. So some of those are sort of giving as something that is mutual, right? It is not it's not a subject object. If you're really doing philanthropy right, it shouldn't feel subject object. It should feel more subject subject. Um, and I always felt that, growing up at the in the shrine, there it never felt so, like I remember, um, working with you and Dad to set up a temporary shelter with the homeless for the homeless folks at the shrine. Going to the Hand in Hand Festival every year to work with mentally disabled communities. Um, and there was never an energy of like, oh, we're helping. Sometimes there's like a charity trap of like we are here to help. There are these people in need. There was just we're all sort of here to help each other. And sometimes we were the ones who received the help. I also remember the meal trains. When someone was sick or having just had a baby, and the meals would be delivered. Like that was so power. Like it was a really powerful thing for me to grow up with that energy around me. And I think I internalized it really deeply. And I bring that to the work I do now in philanthropy, um, where whether I'm talking to a donor who is a billionaire, which is something I do, or I'm talking to an immigrant rights leader who's working out of their basement apartment to try to mobilize and protect people in a really urgent time, the energy is the same. Sort of, how do we do this together? How do we make this work? And that's so powerful, that always remembering people's humanity. That is just a powerful model for thinking about philanthropy, about activism, and it absolutely gives me hope. And the last thing I'll say I learned I did from you and Dad and the community was it should also be fun. Like it can be you can raise money and do that. You can do a day-long telethon. You can put on a show that is inspired by Gilligan's Island and Fantasy Island being mashed up and sing. Like those are, it doesn't have to be, like it can be joyful and joyful doing our activism and our philanthropy joyfully is also really, really powerful.
I'm thinking about that's wonderful, Ben. And yeah, that's why we're doing it like this. Absolutely. To make it joyful, because that is the intention, that it's a subject, that it's not that the message is, aren't we all in this together? Does this matter? So if you're listening to this and you've been receiving some sort of meditation, please get back to us, right? I'm going to use you, Ben, as an opportunity outright
Yeah.
uh, asking, because we have a very big goal, and we are the we haven't put the thermometer up because the thermometer is like this. So while Ben and I are talking, we hope you're going to um, go in and really reach into your pockets, and if this work matters to you, if the things we're talking about climate change, about immigration, about community, about we're going to be talking about affordable housing. These are and one of the things I really, really believe, I love that you talked about talking to the billionaire, and then that it's not about a hierarchy of where are you on the money ladder. Every every gift is meaningful, and it can be,
Absolutely.
and it can be such a rich experience to receive giving and to do giving. We had you mentioned the ancestors when your grandmother passed. We did a wonderful, it there was the hurricane in Puerto Rico, and it was Puerto Rico is our homeland, and we did a fundraiser for people who were on the ground helping in recovery from the hurricane. And I can't tell you what a meaningful journey that was. Um, well, I know you do
Yeah.
know for our family, and I believe in the ancestor thing, and I believe that my mom, even right now, is smiling when even for the memory of it. Um, so yes, so nurturing hope through philanthropic giving, we can do it.
And I think it's a thing that makes me think of it's hard to do both advocating and giving when we ourselves are exhausted. I think exhaustion is one of the other things that makes it hard to find hope. Um, but there also is C.S. Lewis, an author who you introduced me to, um, says in the Screw Tape Letters, so it's sort of all, it's from the perspective of the devil, so everything is inverted. But as the devil is giving his instructions to how to tempt a human, he says, try to get your human to be exhausted, but just the right amount of exhausted. Because if you get him too exhausted, he actually may find a level of strength that is insurmountable. And I often think of that. It feels so rawly true to me. Um, and I think that may be the level that some of us have to reach in the years to come. We may have to be prepared for that. And I think of a couple of moments. I think of the hurricane where I know I don't know if he's still there, but the executive director of the Community Foundation of Puerto Rico, and he was, one of the key people who was helping raise money, get resources to people, figure out how to make it work. He himself had no power and no running water. So he told me this when I saw him, like a year later, as we were like deeper into the recovery, which unfortunately did take a really long time. He said every day, Ben, I would wake up, I would go get water from like the local place where you could get potable water, bring it, lug it back to the house, then go into the office. Then like it was just he was just exhausted, but he found that energy well, that Lewis talks about, of that level of energy where you're actually, closer to God or to something deeper, however you may frame it, because there's nowhere else to go for energy at that point. And I felt that way after Pulse. I was in my role at Funders for LGBTQ Issues when the Pulse massacre happened, and had friends who had lost people, and was just, completely at my spiritual and physical limit, not sleeping, and also then trying to organize donors and funders and others to make sure, are people getting the resources they need? Are they getting the mental health they need? Are they getting um, Spanish? A big issue was we needed Spanish. That we suddenly, this very specific thing became very important. We needed Spanish language mental health professionals who also were LGBTQ friendly and who really could, and not just LGBTQ inclusive, but who really could deeply engage around queer issues with someone who maybe lost a partner that night or a chosen family member. And there weren't really any in Orlando at the time. Now, positive story of how crisis can lead to good things if we respond well. Now there are dozens um, of LGBTQ competent, fully bilingual mental health professionals and whole networks in Central Florida that didn't exist 8 years ago, because the community did in fact come together to respond to the needs.
So thank you for that. I know those are two incredible stories. I mean, and maybe what we need to do is tell these inspirational stories because I feel like we're living in a world where um, we've been talking a lot about not catastrophizing, but on the other hand, the post-traumatic stress that is kind of in the air everywhere. I love that you quoted Lewis. Um, we have to not be undone by it. And I think these stories of people who have been working through thick and thin, um, an interesting word phrase to my other writer friend, um, to continue, to somehow,
Yeah.
you know, push forward, move through it. Um, and because there's kind of and I feel this, I'll be honest, I do feel this advocacy overload, what I'm going to call advocacy overload, because there's so many things that I'm worried about right now. I'm worried about immigration as we enter the into a time where minorities are not going well, or already not looked on in a friendly way or a supportive way, and that the senses that will worsen. the likelihood is that will worsen. Um, that climate change, that all of these things, as
Yeah.
you say them, your energy just goes boom, 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 and you're like, we're being limited humans. You're sort of like, where will I put my attention? How can I serve the moment? How can I serve the
Hmm.
um
I think that's it's a balancing act because we do have to take care of ourselves. Like Pat was talking about, like unplugging, fasting from media can be a very effective tool for self-care and sort of staying grounded. And also we have to stay in tune with what's happening so that we're ready to protect the people who are most likely to be harmed. And we have to avoid catastrophizing, but also recognize when calamities are happening. And also prepare for calamities that are likely to happen. Because people, and unfortunately, these are not just disasters, natural disasters, which are of course exacerbated by human made human caused climate change. These are calamities that people are preparing right now. Um, so in terms of immigration, I am very worried about what is going to happen to our immigrant communities in the months and years to come. Um, I think there is, there's from who has been appointed to the new administration. It is a number of people who have had long, people like Stephen Miller, who have had very long records of advocating for the harshest, most dehumanizing immigration policies possible. So regardless of where the incoming returning president is, which is pretty bad, but even if he had an urge to sort of be somewhat moderate, there are going to be a lot of forces around him that are pushing for the most brutal policies possible. One that just came out, and I don't know if you've seen this, Mom, but just in the past couple of days, a thing that's come out that's relevant, I think, to the interweave
very relevant
community
to
is the I don't know if you've and I heard the couple hours before me, but not all of it. So I don't know if this has come up yet, but the policy around churches and faith
that
communities.
churches may no longer be places of sanctuary. It's
Right.
sort of like, boy, when you talk about the medium is the message, like what is the sound of that?
Yeah.
Churches can no longer be sanctuaries. It literally took my breath away when I heard that said. And we, during the pandemic, again, opportunities. Ben, you helped me as we constructed at Summit Interfaith Council, um, and Interweave was at that is at that table, um, a grant to help
Hmm.
undocumented um, immigrants in the Summit community. But it's such a great, I mean, going back to, weaving advocacy and giving and humanity, because people, people think this doesn't have anything to do with me. Well, I think
Yeah.
in all of these things, one of the things that happens when we think this is too much, people think this doesn't have anything to do with me. This is too much. So I'll say to myself, this doesn't have anything to do with me. And during the pandemic, people learned that these were people who were taking care of their children, or they had this association and that, because slowly we were bringing those people a little bit into the light so that they could get the help they needed to get through the pandemic. It's a human community. And if we could, my hope is that that spirit can return as we continue to move through this work, to say, this is this is a human thing. This is
Yeah.
about a human,
Absolutely.
and the
And
intersectionality, which came up in the conversation with Fletcher, which to me was so helpful because, you know, it's not about recycling. It's about, or just about recycling. It's about, how do you go to work? Where do you live? What do you eat? That all of these things are
hmm
intertwined, and that uh, our immigrant documented or not, brothers and sisters are foundational to the life we share in this country, and that we all of this is about sustainability. They are not separate issues. They are the same issue. And it's funny because when you talk about that C.S. Lewis, the temptation, I think, is to separate them. Because if
Mm.
they combine, when they combine, they'll be a great force for good. So I want to become a champion for let's combine forces because now more than ever, we need one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be clear, so that this is a possibility, like, because in terms of the not catastrophizing part, this policy around the reversing of the policy on churches has not happened yet. It's not, I mean, right? Um, this has been a policy since 2011 or so, and the policy is just because the clarity, I think, is good of information, right? So the policy is ICE will not, unless there's a really dire need, like a terrorism fear or something really substantive, ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, will not raid places that are considered sensitive areas, which are churches and other places of worship, hospitals, and schools. I think that's a good policy in a number of ways. It's certainly, one of the, I mean, when think about a hospital or a school, you don't want people to be fearful in those places. You don't want to have disruption of learning or healthcare or the communities that happen places of worship. So to me, it's a very sensible policy. And it's also a case, I think one of the other things is there's a fear that um, that that there's no power of now for those who care about immigrant rights, for as one example. And I think there actually still is. And faith communities are a great example of that. Maybe a lot of people who are standing against immigrant rights don't care if the National Immigration Law Center says they think this is a bad policy. They may ignore them. But if church leaders, if Jewish community leaders, if Muslim community leaders, if they stand up and say, hey, we don't like this policy, maybe that we think that we don't like this thing you're thinking about reversing, which is just at the executive level. It's not a legislative law, but multiple administrations have held it, including actually Donald Trump in his previous administration did not reverse that policy.
We need to talk to
Um,
Donald Trump's better angels. I am. I'm ready to talk.
Yeah, and I think there are people in the Interweave community who are better positioned to do that than some of the usual suspects. So I think it's a great example of um, where we do there are more possibilities than we imagine, and we can't give up the fight until we've lost it. So that's one of the many battles to come will be protecting that policy for so many reasons, right? Not because the truth is, not that many immigrants necessarily like are actually living in churches to get sanctuary. It's more of being able to know they can go to a place to maybe go to a food pantry or to go to for their own worship. That's usually where it's primarily applicable. Um, so I am hopeful that there's still levers of power because the other thing is. Um, it's often been the case that in the struggle for human rights, we've not had, people with power have not always been, people with power are reluctant to cede power, right? What's the exact quote? Power gives nothing easily. Um, so we have to look for, okay, where do we have power? And where do we have, communities of faith have a certain moral power that's very unique. There still is a complex court system where we can at least slow things down when people's human rights are being abused. There are still a lot of places we can go and tools we can use to advocate, which has always been the case anytime that people are being, put down, which unfortunately I think is what we're going to see a lot of particularly in this next year.
To not to not be disheartened. I want to just talk very briefly about this idea of privilege and then move on to futuring. Um, be privilege, privilege. We're privileged to be here. I'm going to talk about the positiveness of privilege. Privilege to be here talking to you. Privilege to be on the airwaves, to have a voice. Privilege that we still uh, have levels of power that believe that that exists, and in fact that that exists, and that we can actualize that, take that to ourselves, realize that. We, there is, the lingo of the day that we are, we are living in a privileged society, and we are not, but just, suffering or understanding, or yes, the truth is, I forget what the number is. 110 wars are happening in the world right now. I do think that's always good perspective giving thinking. Um, but I have to say, I don't think of myself as apart from that. And I think that is part of the issue, is that we think, well, we're over here and there, it's part of that they, them thing. If, as spiritual people, we have to change our minds and our hearts and our spirits, the way we approach these things. Those are my brothers and sisters in those 110 wars. They are not apart from me. And I don't, if we're going to enter into a time where we're going to, and we know in this country there is more violence. So yes, we're none of us um, not at risk, if you were. But you know what I mean, I'm not exactly sure what I'm trying to get at here, but I don't think there's an is a them us, and I think that it's problematic that we think that, and it's problematic that we think, "Phew, we've been so lucky, and now we're screwed." You know, it- this is the human. Welcome to the human race. There are there are times of peace. There are times of war. There are times of famine, and there are times of abundance. It's the book of Ecclesiastics, and we are part of that story, and we these are the times that we're in. We have to somehow be one with the times that we are living in, and enter into it not as apart from, but a part of the larger human story. So with that, hopefully being clear, Ben's used to my rantings. Does that make sense to you, Ben?
Yes. I mean, I think we is definitely my preferred pronoun. Um, in any context, I think it's the most powerful pronoun, and it is has toppled fascism more than once in history. So I think that's part of what you're getting at, and I agree with that. Um, I do think there are. I think privilege is an interesting word. Privilege is a very loaded word,
Loaded word, exactly.
in progressive circles. It's been used, I think, sometimes in useful ways as a pedagogical tool to understand different levels of power and comfort, whether that's sure as people born or living in the United States in a relative time of peace, that's a privilege. Uh, those of us who have lighter skin have the privilege of not having to deal with direct racism in the same daily ways as some other people might. Um, I do think it's that when it's used in that way as a pedagogical tool, I think we have to be really thoughtful about it and get more thoughtful about it as movements, as community builders, as we do popular education, to think about all the complexity of privilege, because very often it's people have some privileges and don't have others, right? And I think really leaning into that, because I think one of the challenges we have is, an unemployed white person who is struggling to make ends meet and put food on the table, hearing that they have white privilege, it doesn't quite resonate. I think it hits and it actually is dissonant. So I think recognizing that that feels dissonant for some people and figuring out how to engage with that and talking about economic privilege as well as race-based privilege, which is where a lot of conversations have gone and is extremely important to recognize. Um, So to me, it's about how do we leaning into the complexity of privilege is sort of thing one that I think we need to be better about as movements. And then the other thing is what you've already said, which is getting to the we, using it as a tool. So recognizing what's all of our different positionalities, what sort of are the different things that shape our experience so that we can better, because basically me understanding I have white skin privilege helps me understand better the experience of someone who has faced racism as a dark skinned person. That's the goal of that framework, right? But if we reify that framework too much, it can become any framework can become dehumanizing if we make it sort of
Exactly.
too rigid and too
And
inviolable.
or the idea that my world is somehow, this is where, words can be powerful and can leak into our, you know, somehow my world is better because
Yeah.
I'm safe. I don't know that my world is better because,
Hmm.
like I, we, and I don't want to romanticize. And I'm not trying to romanticize the worker who is working in the field very hard from, morning till night and but I could say, what is better? I can say, what is better? The dignity and goodness of every person, the
Yeah.
dignity and goodness, and a kind, and I know once we start talking about economic, people go crazy. Well, let's at least begin by saying every person, the dignity and goodness of every person, acknowledge their life as good, seeing every life as good. That's what I'm saying. Because I feel like in this world where everything is being tilted, we just have to be really careful about our language. And maybe we're going to have to use more words so that we come to understanding. Let's talk about futuring before I lose you, Ben. You are a futurist, and we talk a lot about science fiction. We talk a lot about science fiction movies, about science fiction novels, and I suspect that one of the reasons is we've always been intrigued by the fact that they take on the big questions. They take on the big what ifs and the possibilities. And there's a lot of catastrophe. We've been talking about a catastrophizing. There's a lot of catastrophizing that happens in the science fiction world. So, with that said, I want to give it over to you. Talk about that,
I
Ben.
think I love, I mean, so it's, I don't, am I think I'm a futurist. I write science fiction and fantasy. Um, and and it is connected to this other conversation because, imagination is a tool that goes hand in hand with hope. And imagining possibilities is the first step to making them reality. Um, I think my just as with philanthropy, my love of futurism and science fiction goes back to childhood and watching Star Trek, the original series, and then the Next Generation with the family. Um, and I think it's such I still find the Star Trek mythos still is very powerful for me because um, it's relentlessly optimistic about humanity, and I think there is something so powerful in that vision of that Gene Roddenberry had. Um, and there are still struggles, like you and Pat were talking about with meditation. It's not like there's like a moment where suddenly, oh, I've achieved enlightenment and then we're better. It's like, no, they've gotten past, you know, unequal distribution of resources in capitalism and wars between nations that have transcended actually the nation state and all of these. They've gotten past a lot of the things that we worry about, but now they're on to new problems, and they're always, sort of going forth and trying to understand, exploring strange new worlds and seeking out new civilizations. Um, and that's just it's a really powerful model for me for how to live. Um, Always, empathy. And to me, it's the twin tools. Star Trek embodies the two of the most powerful tools we have, which are imagination and empathy. And if you have those two things, it's amazing the problems that you can tackle and that we can tackle as humanity if we use those collectively. Um, so the Star Trek world feels a little bit distant right now. But I do believe, they say many times, they say in Star Trek, when they talk, they say, well, it's funny, they actually specifically say the 21st century was hard. Even in the 20th century, Star Trek, right? In the original series and in the Next Generation that came out in the 60s and 80s, they said, oh yeah, well, we went through some very hard times in the 2020s before we got to this more evolved state we're in now. And that I think is interesting and telling in that the writers knew that it wasn't there was a sense even with this relentless optimism, there was also an awareness of, oh, it's not going to be easy to get there, right? Um, just like it wasn't easy for our ancestors to get through Jim Crow or HIV, to go back to the conversation that we started with. It's a hard road to get to that better place. But it is but it is possible to get out into the galaxy with imagination and empathy as
It's interesting because,
our
like,
tools.
several in an earlier conversation this morning with Carrie Kabush, uh, a clinical therapist, and she talked about that once we rest, we can get to imagination and creativity that will help us to move forward. And so it is obviously deeply related.
Hmm.
Remember what I said about Nicole Wallace and Michael Schmidt? I don't want to hold it against you. I don't want to pretend that we're not related. I don't want to hold it against you that it should not cost you that we're related. So you are a writer, and in other words, let me just say that if you were anybody on the show and you had recently written a book, I would give you a plug. So I don't want to penalize you because we're related. And there's a bit of science fiction in this book. And the name of your book, boy, wanted to bring it up because I'm tired to make sure I didn't get it right. Oh boy. Val Vega, Secret Ambassador to Earth. Uh, of Earth. Do you want to just give us a brief like snippet of
Yeah, I can bring. I think I'll
what's
share
it
where.
about and why did you write it?
Um, yeah, well, first of all, it's definitely uh, there's definitely some Star Trek vibes in it on that note. Um, and I think I wrote it, growing up, I not only watched Star Trek, you may recall it was very dangerous for you and Dad to leave a book lying around the house because I would just read it. I was like
Good.
a
And
little book book monster. So whether it was the Enneagram, I read all of your books about the Enneagram, and I had explored my inner child when I was 11, because I read through all your inner child workbooks, um, and and then there was also a lot of science fiction. So and I read through 17 Isaac Asimov books and a dozen Robert Heinlein books, which are sort of classic 1950s science fiction writers. And I completely loved them as kids. And it was only sort of later that I realized, oh, these are, they're great. There's so much I still love about those books, but they're kind of old school. Most of the women are secretaries, which is not the way, it doesn't seem very likely to be
see
the
the
future.
future.
I hope that's not the future we're headed toward, but who knows? The characters are all heterosexual, and if there is a gay character, he's a bad guy, and being gay is part of being a bad guy. Um, there weren't, and the characters were all white, because that was what Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein knew as writers in the 50s. So part of this is I wanted to hey, let's have all that same fun from, whether the Star Trek energy or the Golden Age science fiction energy, but with a more diverse range of characters that recognize it, represents what I've experienced of the world. Um, and the basic premise is Val Vega is a 16-year-old Puerto Rican high school student who suddenly finds out that there's a whole galaxy of an interstellar federation, and she has to be the ambassador of Earth. No one on Earth knows about this, so she has to sort of go rescue this country, this planet that's about to be at war, consumed by war, and still like pass trigonometry and handle the dramas of her friends. So it also captures a thing I really enjoy in literature is that thing of the ordinary hero who's thrust into extraordinary experiences. You know, Peter Parker has to stop Dr. Octopus as Spider-Man, but he also has to take care of Aunt May. Buffy, is slaying vampires at night, but also, you know, hang out with her mom and sister in the daytime. And I love that contrast. I find that really pleasurable and wanted to have that with, okay, Val is going to be um, in high school and, she's going to be negotiating a treaty with telepathic aliens and these jellyfish aliens. And then she has to rush back for the trigonometry test. I wanted to have that sort of fun contrast.
And I don't know. I Without being a spoiler, I think certainly the movement towards galactic peace is afoot.
Yeah, and that's I think that thank you for saying that because that's I think that's the connection to the conversation. It is Val's superpower is her empathy. So as an ambassador, and it's very intentional that she's not the interstellar warrior or the starfighter. She is the interstellar ambassador, and so she's using diplomacy. So definitely, it unfortunately only feels more relevant every day in terms of
Relevant every day.
there are
Actually,
these massive galactic empires, and she is facing them down just with the power of her wits and her empathy. As a human who's, we're seen as a very primitive species. So it has that thing of Star Trek of, we can actually use diplomacy and get past these things, these giant, enormous challenges.
and we all
Uh,
need to be ordinary heroes,
yeah.
facing whatever's coming. And we still need to call our moms, call your mom. Uh, you know, and this one of the things I love about this conversation is things are very serious, and there's a lot of work to be done. But we still need to laugh. We still need to imagine. We still need to create. We can't let um our life force
Absolutely.
be taken. Our life force needs to be protected so that we can serve galactic peace and make it happen.
And that gets back to the joyfulness of and they can even, I don't even think they necessarily have to be separated. Sometimes the advocacy, the giving itself can be full of joy. And because community always is, and it also, it can be hard. That dad says, in community, our joys are doubled, our sorrows are halved. I think that's very true. And I think that's something we'll all be are looking for right now.
Here's my actor studio question. One thing that gives you joy, Ben. What is giving you joy before you go?
What is good right now? The
Something.
first thing that comes to mind, I'm watching Star Trek Lower Decks, which is like a new-ish animated Star Trek that sort of both celebrates and makes fun of Star Trek. And just watched that episode last night with my sister. Um, and I love that they found a way to sort of it's something that almost feels unachievable. They're parodying Star Trek while also celebrating it and sort of being in the Star Trek universe and telling new Star Trek stories. And I really am enjoying that.
And the fact that I think that the fact that you were sharing it with family, it's kind of
Yeah,
a
that makes it even better. No, yeah, definitely we're definitely a Star Trek family.
um Ben, thank you for sharing a powerful hour with us on how to nurture hope through advocacy, through giving, and through futuring. And if you were and what do you see in the future, Ben, in your last minute? Do you see anything? What are the tea leaves of the sci-fi community telling you? What do we believe might happen? Isn't that what the sci-fi person does? Kind of look into the
Yeah, I think well, yes, though accuracy is I don't the science fiction doesn't need to be judged solely by accuracy. Um, I think we are going to I think that we're going to have some hard times for things like, repression of immigrants. Of also, I'm also worried about transgender healthcare access. Um, and I think that will be challenging. And I also think there are going to be moments where we're going to be surprised at how powerful we are. I think there are going to be moments where we stop really dehumanizing things from happening because we come together. And I think that I'm ready to be surprised and appreciative uh, of our power as humanity when we do find our better. Hard times bring out both the best and worst. So I think we're going to see some of our better angels in 2025, and I'm very hopeful for that.
Ben, thank you for empowering us in this hour and sharing the nurturing of hope.
Thank you.
Gracias. Buenos dias. Not buenos tardes. Buenas
Gracias.
tardes. All right.
Gracias.
Buenas tardes. Bendiciones.